Hey guys, welcome back to the Mountain Breakdowns. Today we are going to be talking about the concept of doing the gi to help your no-gi. In recent times, we have seen the rise of no-gi as it has begun to overtake the performance scene, with organizations like ADCC, who's number one championship, and UFC Fight Pass exhibiting high-level no-gi matches on Flow Grappling and ESPN. Many of the old guard grew up doing jiu-jitsu through the lens of the gi. To many, doing the gi is jiu-jitsu in its purest form, given its historic roots with the Gracies. They see no-gi as an offshoot of the traditional approach rather than a second side of the same coin. In a recent post that inspired me to make this video, it shows that there is a sentiment that I and many people have heard throughout our upbringing of jiu-jitsu. This one you see here by Lucas Lepre. If you ever spent any time in a traditional Brazilian jiu-jitsu based school, i.e. ones that typically do the gi predominantly, they're typically Brazilian, you have to bow to get on the mat, you hear a lot of usa.
Jiu-jitsu is a martial art.
In this post, Lucas Lepre exclaimed the power of the gi as a basis of developing fundamentals, and it's actually a key component to developing your no-gi game. He used several victories of competitors with strong gi backgrounds over those who are considered to be no-gi purists or at least no-gi oriented. I'd like to explore this claim. In this video, I'm going to explain 3 points that argue why gi does not help you develop your no-gi game, and I will explain later in the video where I think that an argument can be made for where training at a gi-based school could and does help you actually develop your no-gi game. The first claim: is the single recent set of matches from the WNO sufficient alone to support his claim? Is it really evident that doing the gi is what is necessary to truly develop fundamental no-gi skills based off the performances of these supposed gi versus no-gi competitors at the recent WNO matches? So there's a phrase in science that goes like this: correlation does not equal causation. So just because we see someone has trained in the gi does not mean that the gi is the reason why they were victorious, especially from such a small sample size of only 4 matches and without truly standardized matches. This means that the competitors would need to have trained under almost the exact same set of circumstances their entire career, but have the primary difference be only the gi. Then you could make this claim more sufficiently. The biggest variable that differentiates these matches is not their preference or simultaneous activity in gi and no-gi, but the total number of years doing jiu-jitsu between the two people. If you look into these competitors and compare their total years of training jiu-jitsu, you immediately see a quality that would serve as a greater determiner of outcome than the mere time in the gi. Most of the competitors who won had nearly double the number of years of training and a significant amount of time competing in the tenure of their careers. So just like you would say that the gi is supposedly a contributor, so is total mat time, competition time, etc. You might see that Dante and Diego have similar experience levels, and therefore you would think, well, that surely would be a good example of gi over a no-gi competitor, but you might remember that Dante actually has an extensive number of years as a gi competitor. How do you go about using that and differentiating that? That seems like actually a pretty even matchup, but there's no real ability for you to say gi is the reason why Diego won versus Dante. This is not to mention the clear size differences in at least 2 of the matches, where you had Victor versus Nick Rodriguez and Tynan versus Oliver Taza. There was a clear size discrepancy, so those wouldn't be able to be used as good reference points because you can't eliminate the fact that size played a huge role in some of those. Lesser the Victor versus Nicky Rod match because it's heavyweight, but definitely in the Oliver versus Tynan match. If we were truly to be scientific about this, you'd have to throw out these as good pieces of evidence to support a bias towards the gi. To add, it's also common they're cherry-picking data, because what about all the times that a no-gi guy does beat a gi guy in a no-gi match, even when the gi guy has a significant amount of experience over the no-gi guy? My second argument, and the most obvious argument that you can make against training gi for developing your no-gi skills, is that there are obvious differences in the techniques, as simply put as the difference in grips. You could even see an argument where training no-gi most likely translates better to gi than the other way around. Past the fact that some of the techniques in no-gi are just plain out banned, they would still be useful and in some ways easier to do in the gi. I personally find when I do gi half guard passing and passing in general, it's so much easier because of the additions of grips, as well as from bottom half guard sweeps with the additions of grips, bolos from the back as well, and etc. Where if you can find yourself able to successfully land them in no-gi, then you can for sure hit them in gi, assuming you learned a little bit about how grip fighting works. Through a basic analysis of the top submissions for examples from gi versus no-gi, in the gi the top 3 submissions are strangles from the back, mostly using lapels, for example the bow and arrow, and arm bars, and triangles as the third. However, if you dig deeper, strangles with lapels and collars from other positions collectively make up a greater percentage of the total submission finishes if you add them all together. They would outdo the triangle as the third. This goes to say that the majority of the submissions in a gi setting rely on gi specific finishing mechanics, versus the top submissions in no gi The top submissions are rear naked strangles, inside and then outside heel hooks, and then the actual fourth one is arm bars. So if you were just to spend your time trying to do the best finishes in gi and or no gi, you would find your time would be generally poorly spent if your goal was to be the best in both, with the exception of arm bars. However, I would argue that the setups are different for both, although most of the jiu-jitsu qualities would be the same, the setups and the positions. That says more about the finish than it does about the preference in either gi or no gi developing that skill. This is not to mention the fact that the nature of each and every match is just very different. No gi has leg locks, it's just faster paced in general, more scrambling, more wrestling, and more takedowns. Gi is more prone to guard play, it's generally slower. The rule sets are very different for them, not benefiting aggression as much. There's a lot more sweeping, sweep orientation, and they use the grips of the cloth and the lapels generally more. I will say from personal experience of rolling with gi heavy people, they do tend to have a different style to their guards. They also tend to play a more traditional guard game. They play positions like De La Hiva and close guard a lot more, which I find to be less common in most no-gi players that I've trained with, versus the typical no-gi approach is very butterfly heavy in the modern meta because of leg locks. My third argument is that gi players don't even really believe that you do the gi to get good at no-gi. These jiu-jitsu fighters do camps for their no-gi matches, typically 6 to 8 weeks. That's like 2 months. They review specific strategies and techniques that they don't normally use in the gi, and they don't normally have to keep in mind while training the gi. If training the gi was so helpful to doing no-gi, there would be no need to do camps or such long camps of pure no-gi. You should freely be able to go back and forth between the two. So here's my attempt to try to meet in the middle and maybe see where they're coming from. So it's not that training at a gi gym does nothing to benefit your no-gi, but I don't think it's obvious what most people think that the benefits actually would be. So here are some aspects of the gi that might help. Number one, I think it's a cultural difference more than it's a gi specific set of techniques that help. In no-gi, I will admit, there's a lot of casuals who train and they aren't the most physically imposing. They're skinnier young guys who smoke a lot of weed, oftentimes we've all seen them. The guy who just starts gi is a dude in his late 30s, probably an ex-cop or was in the military and is juiced on TRT and can out-dad strength the former typical no-gi guy example. It's that many no-gi gyms I've been to, the vibe is more laid back, they aren't murdering each other, they play EDM music and get a good sweat. The Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purist schools I've been to, full of Brazilians, it's a street fight a lot of the time. This is Porrada. The culture of Porrada does not exist typically in regular no-gi gyms. An exception of this is when a former or current wrestler comes in no-gi and every dude is scared of them. These wrestlers have that Porrada culture because wrestling teaches the similar type of mental training that many Brazilians and gi practitioners come up with and go through. It makes it for a very tough room. This quality is oftentimes lacking in the majority of no-gi rooms. Number 2. Gi does a better job at introducing beginners to fundamentals compared to the typical no-gi gym. Most no-gi gyms teach you leg locks day one as your first thing and not half guard. They're the kind of place that teaches rubber guard and not close guard, and it goes on. Gi cultured schools just tend to do a better job in my experience of teaching the essentials early on that these can translate well if you go to a no-gi class or cross-train. No-gi has this capability, but from the many schools I visited and trained at, as I was coming up, it's all over the place. People typically don't have a well-rounded understanding of what works, whereas the gi schools tend to have tradition on their side. Although I think this will be less of a thing as time goes on, as no-gi becomes the more premier side of the sport in a more professional sense. Like with all sports, they adopt more systematic approaches to winning, and what gets you the wins is what people will train. The average no-gi coach is getting a lot smarter. My third point, I believe that the belt system could have something to do with it. Belts are more strongly emphasized in the gi than in no-gi. Many no-gi places still do belts, but I feel that the belts oftentimes can be used to help you know how to teach someone. Oh, you're a blue belt? Focus on arm bars and half guard. Let the more crazy stuff be for when you hit purple and up. And my last point, which I think the main argument boils down to just a few things that nobody is saying very clearly. It's that jiu-jitsu is just jiu-jitsu at the end of the day. You can spend 20 years in the gi, and when you change over to no-gi, it's not like you're an instant white belt again. This is why you see the same thing with wrestlers and judokas when they transfer over. Depending on your background and the style you did, it could immediately translate. If you are a gi guy who does lapel everything and worm guards it up, I am certain you will struggle. But if you are half guard passing with underhooks, do rear nakeds, guillotines, and arm bars, you will probably be pretty well off, just like with no-gi. I have a limited background in the gi. When I first started, I played with the gi, but never spent a lot of time learning gi-specific techniques. I basically just did no-gi in the gi. I did gi when I had limited access to tough rounds, not because I felt them strangling me with bow and arrows would be good for my no-gi, but because the intensity and the mental part of the game is what I was still developing. If you made it this far, thank you so so much for watching. It really means a lot that you guys spent the time, and hopefully you guys learned something. If you guys had any of your own opinions on these, please leave a comment below. You know, I love to hear what you guys have to think, and what do you think of the breakdown in some of the videos and how maybe I can improve them in the future. If you haven't already, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me out. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. It would be awesome if I could get the channel monetized within the next few months, so I could spend more time focusing on these videos. My current goal is to try to do at least one of these videos a month. Maybe shoot me an idea. What kind of topic would you like me to cover? I'm also going to start doing more match breakdowns. Is there a specific match that you would like me to do a breakdown on? I'll try to put this level of detail in it. If you have any ideas, message me on Instagram, or you can leave a comment here below. Thanks.